The San Antonio Spurs are scaring me a bit, guys. I think their off-season has been not terrible, but I think they're definitely, on paper, worse defensively than they were a previous year. And if you're going to get worse defensively, and you're San Antonio, and that's kind of your main thing, given that they were one of the best defensive teams in the league this season, actually they were the best one, then that's not good. They lost two guys who I think really helped them out, one of which was Jonathan Simmons, who we saw especially in the postseason, and especially, if that's a saying, which it isn't, against the Warriors in Game 1, we saw that he was a guy who could be a wing, who just knew what he was doing on that side of the floor, could switch at least a couple of positions, and was able to hang around against Golden State, and I think he was definitely a reason why in Game 1 they seemed to have a chance until Kawhi Leonard went down. And now he's gone, and he's off to the Orlando Magic, where we can all just forget about him forever. But it sucks, man, because I think he was a guy who was really going to help them out, just with having another really good wing defender to go with Danny Green and Kawhi Leonard. And then they also lost Dwayne Dedmon. Now, Popovich didn't play Dedmon that much in the playoffs anyway, which I still don't understand, because to me, Dedmon's just pretty legit when it comes to being a defensive player. And he chose to go with Pau Gasol over him. They managed to find a way to beat the Rockets with Pau Gasol on the floor, because the Rockets never want to shoot two-pointers. Against the Warriors, Pau Gasol was pretty much useless because the guy can't defend in space. And that's a similar thing can be said for LaMarcus Aldridge. I mean, Aldridge might be a little better, but I wouldn't consider him to be a plus defender either when it comes to being a big dude. And that's all San Antonio pretty much has to go with in terms of their big guy defenders, because like I mentioned, Dwayne Dedmon's gone. And actually, if I'm looking at the entirety of this team right now, I don't think there's really anyone who I'm trusting to play defense besides Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green. Now, to be fair, Kawhi Leonard is the best perimeter defender in the NBA, and Danny Green is like maybe the 6th best perimeter defender in the league. So it's a great set of wing defenders, but everybody else, like Tony Parker, I mean, I'm not going to trust him to do much defensively. Patty Mills is probably a little better, but even then, I think he only can really defend opposing point guards one-on-one, and I think he would have some trouble getting around screens and stuff like that. And then I mentioned before, you got Pau Gasol and LaMarcus Aldridge as your 4-5 guys. And then if we're going to your second unit, I mean, you just picked up Rudy Gay. I'm not going to assume that he's going to just suddenly get better defensively. I think he hasn't been as bad the past year or two, but I still don't think he's like a good defensive player. I guess if he can just be not bad, then that's enough, but when you went from a guy in Jonathan Simmons who was legit good on defense to a guy in Rudy who I'm just like, as long as he doesn't suck, it's okay, that's a downgrade. You did bring Manu back, and I do think Manu has actually kind of been able to maintain just being average while he's gotten older. But again, you know, having an average defender around very good defenders is okay. Having an average defender around more average defenders, then we got kind of a problem. So I do think Popovich is going to have to get kind of creative with who he plays Kawhi Leonard with and then who he plays Danny Green with. You might kind of need, was that proper English? I don't know. You may need one of them on the floor at all times, which is usually what you say about offense, but it's kind of like you need one guy to carry the defense. I do trust Popovich is going to be able to figure out, because he's Greg freaking Popovich. I mean, one strategy they had this previous season, which I mentioned what they did against Houston and it really worked, was just have your big dude back up on the pick and roll, because if anything, Pau Gasol can still defend the rim pretty well because he's a tall dude with decent wingspan, and I would say LaMarcus Aldridge is in a similar boat. I don't know though, at what point is the defensive talent on the floor just not good enough to where no matter what Popovich does, these guys are just not going to be that great on that side of the floor? I say not that great, and they'll probably still finish like 5th because Popovich is a genius, but also, worse comes to worse, if the talent is just so bad that Popovich can't get them to be a great defense, they could probably still be like 8th or 9th in the league. That's how much respect I give to Popovich and how much of an impact I think Kawhi Leonard as well as Danny Green can make. But I think it should also be said, like, they can acquire someone within the season. Maybe someone is bought out, or they can get some sort of a trade to happen. I don't think it's like a lost cause that they can't get any defensive players. But at the same time, like, they lost one dude who was really integral to what they did perimeter defense-wise, and then they lost Dedmon, who was good in the regular season. So I think it's going to be tough. And that was just defense. I think if we can talk about offense now, I mean, Tony Parker, a year older, he's really weird in that he starts every season kind of sucking, and then as the year goes on, he looks a little more athletic and still ends up averaging like about 10, 11 points, being a decent enough point guard for what they do well. I imagine Patty Mills either will be, he might be starting actually this year for them. I don't know. Maybe at this point, Patty has surpassed Tony Parker. They could get more shooting in there immediately, and he could play off of Kawhi Leonard well. We'll have to see what happens there. But even then, I don't think either one of them are great creators, which means you're just going to have to just create more offense through other avenues, which, again, San Antonio can definitely do. But I don't know. I'm a little weary that their point guard position is just going to be flat out not good enough. So who knows? 2 guard Danny Green. I mean, the 3-point shooting is going to be there. Kawhi is Kawhi. I hope LaMarcus Aldridge doesn't take a dip offensively this season. He was looking kind of slow at times against the Warriors. And I mean, he had some performances in the playoffs, sure. There was the game against Houston where they won without Kawhi Leonard, where Aldridge was kind of looking like his old self. But then there were times against Golden State when they went to him in the post just time after time, and he just kept on missing hook shots or turnaround jumpers. And if that's going to be the new LaMarcus Aldridge, then that's a problem. And that's kind of the fear that I have with the Spurs is you might see that little bit of a dip on defense just because there's not a lot of natural defenders here. You might see a bit of a dip on offense because Aldridge just might not be as good. And then suddenly this team went from, 62 wins last season, if I'm not mistaken, and maybe they go down to like 56. And that difference could be Houston getting a lead on you in the records, which would give them an advantage in the playoffs, things like that. I should mention Rudy Gay just a little bit. I made an entire video on Rudy Gay and how I think he could help but also hurt San Antonio. I mean, it's just going to be interesting to see, is Popovich going to find a way to use Rudy's strengths, which are cutting to the rim and coming off of screens, I guess, to where he can just shoot the ball, because he's not bad at putting the ball in the basket. He's bad at everything else, which is like holding the ball for too long and not being a good playmaker and things like that. It's just going to be interesting to see what Popovich does with Rudy, but definitely a little worried about the Spurs. I think the talent is potentially going to take a dip, but at the same time, this is San Antonio, and it's very much possible that they'll win another 60 games, and the apparent decrease in defense is not going to matter at all, and they'll just kind of figure it out as they go.